All right, welcome to our discussion of utilitarianism. In particular, we're going to talk about John Stuart Mill. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. All right. So utilitarianism is a form of philosophy we'll call consequentialism, and we'll get to what exactly that means here in just a bit. There's a school of thought that was brought to life by Jeremy Bentham, and you can see his dates there, 1748 to 1832, and by his nephew, John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1837. And these two figures try to establish utilitarianism both as a political and economic philosophy, as well as a personal philosophy. And John Stuart Mill was particularly noted for his desire to turn utilitarianism into something that the everyday person could use as their sort of personal ethical philosophy. So what we need to do before we get into exactly what utilitarianism is for Mill is we need to think about something called metaethics. Now, metaethics is the area of philosophy or the area of ethics that looks not just to how we ought to act, so not just in sort of the Kantian way of what we should do at this particular moment, right? But it asks more sort of basic questions, more general questions, such as what is the good? What does it mean to be right, to be wrong? What is justice, and so on? It questions sort of the methodology itself of ethics, and so when we're doing ethics, right, these meta-ethical questions sometimes just sit in the backdrop. But for John Stuart Mill, they're something that we need to bring right to the fore. That's something that philosophers have been ignoring, and we need to sort of question before we can even do ethical philosophy. So what he sort of looks at is he looks to the history of philosophy, history of ethics. And he begins to ask some questions about it, right? And the sort of main question that he asks has to do with the fact that philosophy has continued and continued to ask this same particular question over and over again, and they have not yet come to an answer. And that question is the question of the good. What does the good mean? What does it mean for something to be morally acceptable? And he says that we've been debating this for millennia, and we have not come to an answer yet. And for him, that's evidence for something, and what that is evidence for is that we're not going to be able to prove what the good is. It's not something that is subject to direct proof. Rather, we need to begin by sort of just sort of considering what we believe our starting point should be. Right? What do we want to assume as the starting point? And so for Mill, right, he tries to be very just sort of straightforward, right, about that question, and not try to shy away from it, not try to believe that he's going to come up with an answer that no one else has been able to, right? He wants to say that, hey, what I'm going to do here right now is I'm going to make an assumption, and you can either buy my assumption or you can reject it. And if you buy my assumption, then I'll tell you some implications of that. If you don't buy my assumption, if you reject it, well, I can't prove that my assumption is the only possibility, right? I can't show that to be true. And so you either will have to be persuaded in other ways, or you're just going to have to reject my philosophy as a whole. He believes he can persuade us, but he can persuade us not by providing some sort of absolute sort of proof, right? A sort of deductive proof to his starting point. So we can ask then to what that starting point actually is, right? Where is it that he gets his basic sort of thinking from? And he begins from what we call a teleological standpoint. So we've mentioned this before with Aristotle, and Aristotle, if you remember, believed that everything in the universe has some sort of purpose, right? And so teleology just has to do with an end or a purpose. That we as human beings are purpose-minded beings, that we're always seeking to achieve some purpose. And hopefully that you can sort of notice that this is very counter to the Kantian assumptions about ethics, right? For Kant, ethics doesn't have anything to do with a particular purpose that we're after. Rather, it's about it has to do with performing our duty, right? Following certain rules that we're given, not for some purpose that we're trying to attain. So what does John Stuart Mill have to say about this? He says, all action is for the sake of some end, and rules of action, it seems natural to suppose, must take their whole character and color from the end to which they are subservient. Okay, so what does he mean there, right? That we're after something, some particular end. I just remember my example with Kant when we talked about hypothetical imperatives, and I gave the example of health, right? That my end, my purpose, right, that I'm giving myself is to be healthy. And then the rules of action, right, must take their entire character from that end from that end of health, right? And so the rules, such as, eat healthy, right? Get regular exercise. Those are the rules of action, but they take their whole character from this end to which they are subservient. When we engage in pursuit, a clear and precise conception of what we are pursuing would seem to be the thing we need, instead of the last that we are to look forward to, right? So we need to know that which we're after first, right? Not that we should begin with our sort of rules of action and then just sort of see where it takes us, right? We should look forward to what we want, and then determine how we should act, rather than acting and then determining where it gets us to. Test for right and wrong must be the means, one would think, of ascertaining what is right or wrong, and not the consequence of having already ascertained it. Okay, so he begins again with this teleological or purpose-based standpoint, this ends-based approach. And so the end that he's after, and his way of approaching, he says, cannot be proven, right? This evidence cannot be proof in the ordinary and popular meaning of the term. Questions of ultimate ends are not amenable to direct proof. So we can't say like, oh, this teleological approach is the way to go, or the particular end that he's after is going to be amenable to proof, right? It's just not the type of thing that is. So what does he say then, right? We have to, again, assume the end. So the question then is, what is that end? And we could think about a lot of different possible ends, right? So utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism. And consequentialism is basically what we're talking about. It looks at the consequences of our actions and it weighs those consequences, it tries to say, okay, if I do this action, right, this many positive things will occur, this many negative things will occur, right? And so if more positive than negative occur, then do the positive thing. And so we can use all sorts of things as our sort of consequences that we're looking to. We use consequentialism, for example, in economic theory, right? What's going to produce the most amount of value, let's say, right? That's our consequence that we're after. So we sort of look and say, okay, these are the things that will increase value, or in politics, right? What is going to lead to the best particular outcome that we're after, right? Whether it's if we're looking at like healthcare policy, right? What's going to bring about the sort of the healthiest and lowest mortality rate and so on, right? Like these different factors that we're after, and then we can evaluate policy based on that. So consequentialism, I think, is a pretty common approach. I think most of us are pretty comfortable with consequentialism. There are problems with consequentialism. We're going to discuss some of those. One of the most obvious is that when we're sort of looking to consequences, we don't know for sure that the consequences that we are shooting for, right, will result from the actions that we take. We don't know that, right? It's not something that can be certain beforehand. It's something that shows up after we've done the actions, and we can see, okay, did the benefit that I was after, did it come to fruition or not? But utilitarianism as a form of consequentialism is going to talk about a certain type of end. And so what might that be? What do you think the end, the consequence that we are really after when it comes to ethics? Now, Kant, if you recall, he wasn't after any particular end, right? He was after doing the right thing for the right reason. So his sort of purpose in his ethics had to do with moral worth. Remember that the only thing that's good in itself is a good will, right? So it's a will that is governed according to duty. Utilitarianism rather is going to look to something else. And so what is that? So for the utilitarian, it's going to be happiness, right? So the principle of utility, or greatest happiness principle. So actions for Mill are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness for the greatest number, and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So for utilitarianism, what we do is we take a look at our actions. And we say, hey, if we look at these actions, and these actions are producing, right, more happiness than sorrow, right, then we should perform these actions, right? That's what we should do, right? If our actions are producing more sorrow, right, than happiness, then we shouldn't perform the action. So pretty straightforward, right? And we can apply this to every aspect of our life. And we do, right? We do apply this to every aspect of our life. We think through the consequences of our actions, and we tend to make decisions based on the ends that we're after. sometimes we don't care. Sometimes we just say, whatever, we're going to go out and get drunk tonight, even though I'm going to feel terrible tomorrow. I'll wish I hadn't, right? But we're still doing the same thing, right? Because we're thinking that we're going to enjoy ourselves, and our enjoyment is going to outweigh any pain or sorrow or whatever disappointment that I have tomorrow. So we're pretty used to this way of thinking. So next time we're going to talk about what happiness is for John Stuart Mill, because he's going to have a very particular definition for happiness. And then we'll continue on, and after that, we'll talk about some different implications and problems that may arise from utilitarianism. So I'm going to sign off now. We'll pick it up here in just a bit.